looks like folks are still having some problems getting on the.
I sent you a note about this too, Steve. Tracy scheduled a competing meeting.
Yeah, what's happened is we back in June or July, we reworked the schedule for August where the outreach and the general meetings were going to be canceled and start back up in September. And for some reason, they didn't get taken off of the CDF calendar. So that's how come it looks like there's a competing calendar. I think I have access to that calendar now, so I'm going to try going in there and cleaning those up to fix the confusion.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. And this meeting that we're doing now is talking about the Ortelius integration with Keptn. So Keptn is an event-driven orchestration tool that we need to write. I don't know if it's called a plugin. Ukarsh, what do they call them in Keptn? A service?
Yeah. So like we can't say plugin obviously. So a tool or a service would be great. Yeah.
So what we're going to be doing is writing a service that's going to interact with the Keptn events. The Keptn events are basically we can push around, push and receive cloud events. So be more of a generic cloud event structure that we get to attach our own payload to. Now when we talk about the overall process of how the events are going to work, if we look at the simple CI process, and we'll just take a single microservice that somebody may be writing. So the example we'll just use is we'll have an application that's made up of 10 microservices. Each one of those 10 microservices is going to have its own Git repo. So they're going to have their own pathway for the build. So on the welcome the new folks. We're just getting started. I haven't missed much. So when we have a microservice, a developer updates the code to a microservice, they check their code in, and then Keptn is going to have a listener. Joseph, can you go on mute?
Yep. So
I got him. So Keptn's going to listen for the git commit or the PR merge, whatever part of it is. We'll just say that the developers does the merge. We have a new commit. Keptn will listen to that event, and it will start doing its processing. I want to say workflow, but there's a file inside of Keptn called the shipyard file that allows you to set up certain events to listen for and how to respond to them. So one of the events that Keptn will be listening to in the shipyard file will be the git commit. So the first thing we want to do at that level is to do our Docker build. So one of the things that the Keptn folks told me was they don't have necessarily like the plugins like you do for like Jenkins that will go ahead and actually have like a Docker plugin. But they do have more of a generic way to have basically run a shell script based on that event. So what ends up in turn is we run the Docker build. At that level, we can once the build has been completed, we can send out another event back to Keptn that said we completed the Docker build. Now from there, we do we can break it down into even further grain, where the next step is we want to do our Docker tag and our push at that level. So it just depends on how fine grained you want to get on where you want to start sending the events back and forth. Now, I believe they even go as far as, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Utkarsh, they will send out events saying, I'm starting this process. So I'm starting the build will be in one event. I'm doing the build as another event, and then I've completed the build as another event. Is that correct, Utkarsh?
Correct.
Okay. So
can I ask a question quickly
yeah,
before you
go
carry
ahead.
on?
Yeah.
Can you explain the difference between Jenkins and Keptn? Why there's a difference?
Yeah. So Jenkins, the steps are laid out in the Jenkins pipeline. So your flow is pretty static. So as you go from the Docker build to the Docker tab to the push, those are pretty serial and listed in your Jenkins file. Now in the Keptn world, those events are going to be in your shipyard file, and you can do multiple things when you receive an event. So let's say after we do the Docker push, we want multiple events to occur at the same time. So one of them is we want to do a security scan of the Docker container. And then we want to start also doing test run of the container. And then also we want to tell Ortelius that we did the build. So those are 3 events that can happen simultaneously. And that's where in the shipyard file, we'll be able to respond to the completion of the Docker push. So that's where it becomes really flexible, because if we want to add in another listener for somebody to do something else, let's say we want to start the deployment to the dev environment, we can start that as well just by adding in another listener to do that that deployment to dev, for example. So that's where the flexibility of Keptn comes into play, because it's event driven. We can insert things to act upon without having to go and like rewrite hundreds of Jenkins files.
Yeah, so is Jenkins more kind of static in its task? It's more like do one, move on to the next one, whereas Keptn has a more, I don't know, is AI?
But it's more event driven.
It can do multiple things at the same time.
Yeah, well, what it is the relationships between the steps are not, they're more dynamic.
Yeah, dynamic, that's the word, yeah.
Yeah, so they're dynamic. So if I want to add a new event in there, a new event listener to do something off of, I can add that in very simple, where in the Jenkins side is where the events are going to kind of drive your process. So it's just like in any event programming language. If you get into like Windows programming, or even in like in Rust uses a lot of events, and there's certain programming language, even like in Node.js and JavaScript, you can have an async call to go get a web page, and while that's off doing something, you could go do something else. And that's the idea behind the Keptn event processing. Now, another thing that provides the same capability on the Jenkins side is something that's called JWT, I think. No, Jenkins templating, JTE, Jenkins templating engine. And the Jenkins templating engine allows you to create these templates once and put in placeholders for where you want something to occur in the future. It may not be there yet, but you can put in like a no-op process. So when you do implement it, you don't have to go change all your you just change the template and not all the pipelines itself. So there is a solution for the Jenkins side, but on Keptn, it's all done through the shipyard file. And also you can have multiple projects listening to the same events. So in our case, if we have microservices, if it's a shared microservice, we can have 2 different projects listening to that shared microservice being built, and they can go off and do their event processing. That could be totally different. So project A and project B could have totally different pipelines, but they're going to both be triggered when the Docker push has been completed. That makes sense?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Jeez. So I must just remove Jenkins from my environment then.
Yep. And another event-driven tool is called Directive. Directive has a little more of the, I want to say what we're going to call them plugins, because it's based off of Knative. So it's going to pick up the Knative events, which there's like 40 or 50 of them out of the box. And then you can add your own, which Keptn is a little bit different on their implementation at that level. Now, also, we have the CD events project at the CDF. And what they're trying to do is standardize the event language. So when I say do a build, what does that mean? What is the payload for starting to build? What is the payload of when I'm done with the build to pass on to other folks in out there that's listening? So that's one of the things that you'll see is the CD events kind of giving trying to bring a comprehensive language around the events, so everybody's talking consistently. So in the Ortelius Keptn world, we're going to do that Docker build of that microservice. Ortelius could get notified. That will be one of the notification integration steps is the Docker push has been completed. Ortelius is going to then go ahead and listen for that event to happen. And what it's going to do is it's going to, our event listener for Ortelius would need to then go ahead and take the payload and create a new component version inside of Ortelius. So what ends up happening is every time we do a Docker build, we're going to have a new component version that we're going to end up create inside of Ortelius. So once we have this new, we listen on that, we're going to go ahead and do our step at that level. So that's where our service is going to be listening on the completion of the builds and looking at the payload to go ahead and update the component versions. Now, when we have multiple, that in turn, in the Ortelius side, when we create a new component version, we also will go ahead and create a new application version. So we look at who is consuming the current version of the service of the Docker container. And then we have a new version coming in. And what that tells us to do is all the applications that are consuming the current version of the service, let's go ahead and create a new version of the application and just replace that version of the service with the new one that we just built. So what we end up doing is we end up creating new versions of the application on the consuming side. So if you think about the microservices world, the microservice is kind of like the producing side, and then the application's the consuming side, for example, the front end. So when we do this, Ortelius does two steps. We create the new component version, and then it goes ahead and creates the new application version, consuming the new component version at that level. Now, just because we have a new logical application version doesn't mean that we've done anything with it. So what we need to do is go and tell Keptn that we've done that. So we actually will broadcast a new event saying that Ortelius is done. We have a new application version that we're ready to deploy. So that's where the next step, where Ortelius will actually be broadcasting its events out as well with its payload and things like that back out to the Keptn control plane to let everybody else know that whoever's listening on Ortelius to do something, it's done and we can go on to the next step. So the next step, I'm going to shorten the diagram that Sasha and I put together, and we're gonna kind of skip some of the pieces, but we'll just to make the conversation a little bit easier, and when we may circle back around to fill in the gaps if there's any. So when we get the new application version out there for this microservice, Keptn's going to go ahead and we're going to send that message back to Keptn. We're done on the Ortelius side. Keptn may turn around and send us a new message that says, go ahead and deploy this. So, or go ahead and tell, we're going to have Argo go ahead and deploy it. So what we may be doing is looking at the Argo Ortelius Keptn link. And the way that one is built is based on the Git repo. So Argo doesn't really listen to events from Keptn, but it does listen to commits on the Git repo. So when we go ahead and have Keptn tell us to go ahead and do a deployment, what we would do is Ortelius would go ahead and listen for a deployment event, and in turn it would go ahead and actually write the appropriate versions of the services and all the SHAs and all that stuff to the Helm charts. Either you can use it customize or Helm. It could go either way. It doesn't really matter. But basically, at the end of the day, is we're going to update the Git repo with the Kubernetes, either the Helm templates or the actual manifest files themselves. And once we write that, we're going to commit it back to the repository, and then Argo will take off from there and do the deployment. So Argo will do the deployment to the cluster. This is one of the things I'm not 100% sure on, is if we're going to get a notification back from the Argo side, or if we're going to get a notification back from Kubernetes saying that the deployment was completed. And once we get that deployment is completed, we log that. Ortelius is listening to that again, and we log that this version of the application was deployed to this cluster at this time. And these were all the services that went with it. So that's where the process kind of comes together. And what I found was when we look at the relationship between Keptn, Argo, and Ortelius, there's some different places that we need to do updates, and I'll get into that if there's no questions, and this kind of makes sense to this point. Everybody good? Okay, so
the diagram you mentioned, is that somewhere it can be looked at?
Yeah. Sasha, can you dig up your diagram, the link?
Yeah, if you put the link in the chat or something.
I have it
Yeah,
on
I think
I shaded on my P cloud. If that's I can put those in so long for people just to take a quick look if they're wondering.
yeah,
Sure.
I thought it was in
I can't remember where.
our documentation as well.
Yeah.
Let me look real quick.
I'll post it in here.
Give me one
There's-
second.
That one's dev.
Yeah.
Then there's QA.
Yeah, so what ends up happening when we look at the process of the pipeline, some of the steps, like the build step, doesn't exist for QA in production. So what we're doing is we're taking that same image that we built in dev, and we're redeploying to QA, redeploying to production. So some of the things that happen at that level aren't repeated. So you'll see in Sasha's diagram, some of the, there's slight differences when you look from dev to QA to prod. So what we end up doing, what I have found is to make this all work, we actually have to have, when we talk about microservice applications, is we actually need an application repository. So that application repository doesn't really contain any code, but it does contain like the Helm charts or the Kubernetes manifest files. And the reason for this is you can do it in the same repository as like one of the microservices or something like that, but it gets a little bit confusing when you start getting into the Keptn and the Argo CD filters of what's being updated at what point of the process. Even if you're working on different branches, if you have dev branch, QA branch, and so on, it actually, when I was playing around with it, it made it a lot easier to have kind of like an application level repository that when microservices are ready to go and you say deploy, that Ortelius is going to say, oh, I know you're deploying to QA. QA is missing these 5 services out of the 10. So what Ortelius does is go and updates the Helm charts in the shared application repository and says, okay, I need you to deploy to this environment and I want you to use these versions of these services at this level. So in the application repository, you do have the different stages of the pipeline. So you have a dev, QA, and prod, and depending whether you're using customize or Helm, or how you have Argo configured with how it filters. But basically, it's all going to be looking at updates against the single repository. So that makes it a lot easier. And what I've seen is this repository is literally a parent chart and a child that includes the child charts. So when Ortelius comes back around and says to deploy something, all it's doing is updating the parent chart to say, I want you to use all these child versions for this version that I want you to deploy. And then Argo will go ahead and do the deployment to the right place at that level. Now on the event side, like I said, I'm not 100% on the Argo, when Argo completes, how it's notifying us. Utkarsh, do you know on that front? I can't remember if you got into those details.
No, Steve.
Okay. Yeah, this would be something where Brad McCoy could answer that question. So I'll have to circle back around with him on that level. So let's just review kind of where the process is. So developer checks in the code for a microservice. Keptn listens for that event. Does the Docker build, sends out an event that the Docker build's been completed. Then it starts the tag and push. And then once that's finished, then Ortelius listens for the push event. It then does its component update in the database, an application version update, and then sends an event back to Keptn. And then Keptn may turn around and say, oh, I want you to go ahead and do the deployment. Ortelius listens for the deployment event. It goes and takes all the information about the application version that we're deploying, updates the manifest files in the application repository. From there, Argo sees that there's a change to the repository, goes off and does its work. Once Argo's done, it notifies both Keptn and Ortelius. Ortelius logs what's happened, and then Keptn takes off. Now, one of the nice things about Keptn is it has this concept of a quality gate. So after we do the deployment, the quality gate feature will kick in on the Keptn side. The quality gate will say, let me throw some data at this new deployment and look at the metrics about what's happening for this new deployment. It'll measure the metrics, and if the quality gate comes back looking thumbs up, we're good to go. It'll actually send another event out, which will allow us to move to the next stage of the pipeline. So in our dev world, we've done our quality gate. Everything's looking good. Now we start a new event and we go on to QA. Now on the QA side, one of the things that, hey, Brad.
Hey, sorry, had a problem with work. I was like, sorry.
No worries. I just going through some of the processing, so I'll catch you up here in a second. So after we do the quality gate at from development and we start moving into QA, we don't have to do the Docker build anymore because we already have the image. The only thing that we need to do at that level is going to be doing the deployment. So Keptn would send out another deployment event. Ortelius would capture that event, and it would recognize that, okay, I'm doing a deployment to QA now. Let me take that version of the application and see how much drift there is between what is there and what people want, what the state is. So let's say the state, let's say in QA, we're 8 microservices behind. So 8 microservices are out of the 10 are behind in versus the version of the application that we want to deploy. So what Ortelius will do is they'll go in and write to the application repository the new deployment manifest files with the right versions of the servers that need to go to QA, and then it goes and commits that to the Git repo. Argo takes off, does the deployment of those 8 services to QA, and then when it finishes, it's going to notify us back to Ortelius to log that was completed. Brad, I had one question. I couldn't remember how it happens. When Argo completes a deployment, who's sending out the event message? Is it Argo or is it Keptn?
Yeah, it's Argo. So they have the concept of the Argo notifications controller.
Oh, that's right.
And that was originally it was separate, but in the last 2 versions they've just put that into Argo. So Argo will send it.
Okay, so Argo is going to let us know that it's been completed. Ortelius is going to listen to that, and also Keptn. Now we go through the process again, where Keptn's going to start doing the quality gate check at QA. And let's say there's a problem, things aren't passing like we should. You can have Keptn make a decision what you want it to do, if you want it to back out or if you want it to just stop at that level. Let's say it's good. We're going to go ahead and go to production. Same thing's going to happen. It's, when you go to production, you may want to run some stress tests or some test cases in production you may or may not want. And that's where the pipeline, the events that are happening in production are going to be slimmed down a little bit to where it's mostly going to be like the deployment and monitoring is what I've usually seen. So that's kind of the process that happens when we look at as we go from dev to QA to production through the event model. Any questions?
Yeah, so so for the Argo notifications, we're going to have one event going to Ortelius and then one event to Keptn, or do we want Keptn to orchestrate the event to Ortelius? It can work either way.
It could go either way. I picked the least, whichever one's easier. I would probably say that to be the most generic, that we have Argo send the event to Keptn and Keptn and Ortelius talk together. Because let's say we replace out Argo with Flux or something like that, then we don't have to, then we're always just listening to the same event from Keptn.
Yeah, I guess like going the other way, we're almost tying into Keptn as well. So some folks might not want to use Keptn. So either way, we can have both. So there's no reason we can't have both. It's just a generic webhook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have one question, maybe for Brad. So we were saying we'll leverage the webhooks that are there in Keptn, right? So in that case, there is no need to send event that will be listened at the Ortelius part, right? We can like straight away go and use the APIs that are there for written for Ortelius. So that will also eliminate the one application that we are going to write for at Ortelius.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So it's actually there's no point of us supporting that Keptn app that we're going to write for the service. So we can just use the Keptn webhook service now. It's easier, it's cleaner, and less work and support.
Yeah, and one of the things that we'll need to kind of define, I don't think the CD events team have gotten this far, is what the Ortelius vocabulary is. So like there's, we have a component, update a component, deploy a component. They may have the deployment piece, but they won't have anything about us updating components in Ortelius. We'll be able to listen to like a Docker push event. So when a Docker push happens, that Ortelius should be able to listen for that event to occur. But when Ortelius has completed its work, we'll have to define what our vocabulary looks like to let other people know what we've done.
Yep.
And I think usually there'll be typically, and we'll have to see, and we may not need the middle one, but there's a starting, running, and completed kind of state of the event. We may just do starting and completed because our events run so quick.
Also, Steve, there will be requirement for some APIs that would be consumed by UI itself, right? Because you said we'll also create some of the dashboards wherein we are showing some health of different components.
Right, and that would come into when we update when we get the event coming back that something's been deployed to Kubernetes. So Argo completed the deployment. After that, that's where we would want to start gathering. Well, there would be two pieces of metrics that we do want to get back. One was the deployment successful, or was it backed out? That kind of metrics. The other metrics is how well is it running, and that's going to be kind of like a post deployment where something like Dynatrace or Datadog would be giving us, even Prometheus or Kiali would be giving us those types of metrics back. And I don't know how we would, if those would be events coming into Ortelius, or if those would just be us querying a particular endpoint for those metrics.
Argo actually has built-in capability for like DevOps metric or Dora metrics, I think. I'm not sure if it's Dora, but and we have this Grafana dashboard that we could leverage to start off with. If someone wanted to pick up that project, it wouldn't be too hard. Obviously, we need more advanced, but that would be a sort of a good start. Possibly, we could use Grafana also.
Yep.
So Grafana integrated with the Keptn. I'm not talking about this chat, or Grafana integrated with the Argo CD.
I think the initial one was Keptn, but
Keptn. Yeah, that would work. Yeah.
The idea of the idea
because,
of
yeah.
Sorry, go.
Because for the real deployment, we'll use the Argo CD, right? The Keptn would be just for a quality gate or something. So that will just give me some dummy deployment kind of thing.
And you could use the Keptn quality gate in production to gather the metrics as well. So and more than likely, it would be quality gate. Did this get deployed? Would be like one metric. Get it deployed correctly, and then the metric would be like, what's my latency of the services, and that would be another metric that would be kind of like a quality gate feature that would determine whether we're going to do a rollback in production or not. So we may be able to hook into the quality gate aspect of Keptn as well to gather the health and bring that data back into Ortelius's dashboard.
Yeah, so I have one question. Like, one of the features I really like about it, Keptn, is auto remediation. Like, it's not just telling you that this is one thing is happening. It is actually, you can tell, let's say, if I'm running a cluster and I am out of pods, now I have a fix for you. Let's create 2 more pod out of it. So you define those in a YAML file, and when something happened at the cluster, Keptn look at this file and create more pod for you. In the Ortelius case, like, how do we, like, I want to collect some of the microservices, let's say if they are down. You can use the auto remediation feature of the Keptn to make those fixes to the microservices, plus some microservices giving back some of the data. And I can see in the monitoring world, there are some tools in Kubernetes ecosystem like robusta.dev. What they give you, they look at your event and send you the notification in the Slack. And in the Slack, they give you the fixes as well. If you add these 2 lines of the YAML file, your problem is fixed. So if we're using some of the eventing data, we want to make sure if in the future we can use those monitoring events that solve the remediation part of it, they can handle those, they can understand those events as well.
Yeah, one of the things that we would want to record, we wouldn't want to be doing the auto remediation work. We'd let that off to the other tools to do the auto remediation, but we would want to know that it was done and what was done. So that would be something, some of the metrics data that we'd want to capture coming back. So maybe this happens every single time they deploy, they have to go spin up more pods. Who knows? Maybe they have some jobs that run. So when they deploy, they go off and run 100 jobs, and that always causes the pods to spin up. So that may be some of the metrics that we'd want to be able to bring back to the Ortelius dashboard, saying that we keep on doing this auto remediation every deployment. You just have to think about Ortelius as a big sponge of gathering all this data together. So, the more data we can gather and correlate together, the better off we're going to be from the providing value to the customers.
Yes, and on the topic of the seed event side, like last time when I talked to the Anders Grabner, like I look at the seed events in that way, like Keptn is all about events. Like everywhere you see in the Keptn word is event. Like you're talking to some tool in an event way, and when they notify this tool in an event way, and those events are also asynchronous by nature. You can't wait for the stuff to happen. It's going to be the parallel as well. So
yeah, and that's why they have the started event, the running event, and the finished event at minimum, just because everything's asynchronously, at that level. And then, so in general, when we do our events, we want to make sure that we're doing generic cloud events with payloads that have specific data that we're going to pass around, just so we can fit into the CD events without having to rework stuff.
Yeah, so on the topic of the CD event, like I like to think about it, like, do we think about like when somebody send us a data as form of the event, they might giving it the JSON response. Somebody give us YAML response. Somebody give us JSON response. So we sending back the data to, let's say, Keptn, and Keptn sending back the data to us in a different format. Let's say, as of today, we think about like CD event is by default is be acceptable for any open source for tooling. So what end up happening here is just one format of sending and receiving the data, or what actually the purpose was of the CD event.
Exactly. And that's why when we define our vocabulary of events around Ortelius, that we should do them based on cloud events and that type of structure. So if anybody doesn't know cloud events, go ahead and hunt it down and read up on it. It came out of Google, obviously. How they pass things around. And one of the concepts that when I was talking to the product manager of Google Docs, she was saying that when they send cloud events around, the cloud events end up being pretty big. But when they do that, they actually have all the data that you need to do your part of the actions, and you just ignore everything else. So that was one of the things that I found out from them was you're going to get, these things are going to grow, but you only pick out the pieces that you're interested in. And the reason why they did it was so the flow through all the different layers went smoothly without having to do like data transformation on the fly. Alrighty, any other questions?
What's the next steps in terms of delegating work?
I think the next step is we need to we kind of talked this about on the Mermaid on the architecture project about Mermaid, doing a Mermaid JS state diagram of the events. Just so we're all on the same page with working from a picture. I think that will be the next step. And then from there, we can kind of break out each event and whether it exists or doesn't exist, or, and kind of figure out the work that needs to be done based on that. Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah, it sounds perfect. Sounds very interesting and a great project for everyone to be on. I was thinking as well, like for, you're doing the blockchain stuff for context switching. Are we going to have like a little working group for this, or?
That's what I just was going to say. I think we should do a little working group on this as well. So the working group would be able to kind of work through the I'll start the Mermaid diagram to get us started, and then probably I'm thinking maybe later this week or early next week we do a working group to go over that diagram and keep on building it out.
Yeah, we have all the infrastructure ready to go as well.
Okay, cool.
So we have Ortelius, Argo CD, Prometheus, Grafana, Loki, and Keptn.
Perfect.
And also, let's see if we can do, like, if we have some time, can do a hands-on of stuff like what we just talked about today. Is it possible that in this month we can prepare a hands-on stuff? Yeah,
Meha, who's on the call, can do that. She's working with me with a lot of this stuff as well. So I'm also I also created a demo app for everyone to practice with.
Oh, perfect. I just was going to say we're going to need something to work with.
Check out in the chat. It's called Pod Tato Head. So this is from the CNCF Technical Advisory Group app delivery, and they came up with this app where you can change out the pod tato heads like arms and legs and try different versions, and it's perfect for cataloging components and things. So it's quite a good demo app. So I can teach people how to change its arms and legs, and that's good practice for a lot of things.
Yeah,
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, I did one like that with a bicycle.
Nice.
I changed like the colors of the wheel and the frame and things like that. So it's the same concept. I was doing that around a Istio demo.
Yeah. So maybe I can create some issues for like change its leg, change it, and then people get accustomed to the Git repo that it's in, and then yeah, I think it's good practice for people, and it's quite fun too.
Yeah, and how many services make it up?
Services around 10, I think.
Okay, perfect.
Pretty much. If you look at the photo, hat, leg, and a few more. Around 10.
Perfect. I just want to make sure it wasn't like 100. You know.
No.
Or
but even if it was 100, it's not resource heavy.
Yeah. Perfect.
It's very light. It's very, very light. You could run it on a Raspberry Pi.
Nice. So let's see. Let me figure out the next. So does this time slot work for folks, or do we need to go earlier or later?
I fly back to Australia next week, so this is 2:20 a.m. for me.
Yeah.
So we might have to either have two groups or async, or we could have two calls, so like a US friendly and then a UK friendly or Europe friendly, and then India sort of sits in the middle, which is good, and Pakistan. They can sort of almost attend both.
Yeah, I think we're gonna need two times.
Yeah, 2 times is good. It's more inclusive for different contributors.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Well, let me just schedule another working group for this Friday, same time, and then next week we'll add in, when you're back, Brad, into Australia, we'll figure out a time slot for your side.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'll make some issues around Podtato here as well, and feel free to pick them up. I'll give instructions of how to do it, and even if it will even help people do proper commits to Ortelius project, etc., for signing and all that. So it'll be good practice.
Yeah. And when you create the issues for the potato, just label them as like demo or
I was thinking as well, like we have a Ortelius Kubernetes repo, because it's not really an actual proper issue. Maybe I can just create it in there so we don't clutter the actual Ortelius issue board, which is actual tickets.
That works.
Yeah.
Yep.
They might just segregate it so it's not, doesn't clutter the board.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Excellent. Anybody else have any questions, comments, concerns? Okay, so I will get the invite out for this Friday, same time slot, and then we'll work on next week's time slots as well.
Yep.
And just so everybody knows, the agenda for Fridays is we'll work through the state diagram in Mermaid, so folks can see how the events are moving back and forth and stuff like that.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for jumping in here. And like I said when we started, sorry about the late notice and the confusion on the calendar around this. I'm going to try to get into the CDF calendar and get things sorted out. So with that, thank you everybody and have a good night, good day, and we'll talk to you on Friday.
Thanks,
Cheers,
Steve.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.